Utah looks dry today, but for thousands of years, its western half lay under one massive lake. Only the tips of the mountain ranges stayed above the water, rising like a chain of islands across it. When the climate warmed, the lake dried and left behind a crust of salt so flat that racers still use it to chase land speed records. People have crossed this same ground for far longer than cars have, leaving handprints and carvings on canyon walls that still catch the light at certain hours. Further south, rivers cut so deep into the rock that some canyons stay in shadow until midday. Snow still sits on the high peaks while the desert floor below is already warm. Nearly 1,000 feet of ice once sat where the road runs today, and it took thousands of years of melting for the canyon to open up the way it looks now. Up near Lake Blanche, the rock is still polished smooth in places, with long scratches cut into the stone by boulders that used to drag along underneath that ice. The peak above the lake is shaped precisely enough that hikers use its shadow to guess the time of day, which is how Sundial Peak got its name. This canyon also supplies drinking water to much of the Salt Lake Valley, which is why dogs still aren't allowed past the entrance, leash or no leash. Even in the busiest ski season, stretches of the canyon close off entirely, simply to protect the water running underneath the road. Higher up, that same road climbs out of the canyon and crosses into the next valley at over 9,000 feet, at a place called Guardsman Pass. For more than a century, this was a rough miner's route between Alta and Park City, walked on foot or carried by mule. It wasn't fully paved until 2018, and it still shuts down every winter under snow too deep to clear. Aspens turn first along these upper slopes, weeks before the color reaches anywhere lower in the canyon. By the time autumn works its way down to the valley floor, the mountains above have already gone quiet under the first snow. Now, before we move on to the next destination, here's a fun question for you. Which Utah National Park is famous for its towering hoodoos? Comment your answer below. Off the Colorado Plateau, red rock canyons stretch for hundreds of miles in every direction, and then, in one small pocket, there's nothing but sand. This is the only major dune field anywhere on the plateau, and it didn't arrive from somewhere else. The sand used to be solid sandstone cliff face, worn down grain by grain over thousands of years. Its color comes from iron trapped inside that stone, the same mineral that turns rock rust-colored across this part of Utah. The reason the dunes sit exactly here and nowhere else comes down to geography. Two mountains almost meet along one edge of the park, leaving only a narrow gap between them. Wind gets forced through that gap and speeds up. On the far side, it slows back down again and drops whatever sand it was carrying. One insect lives in these dunes and nowhere else on Earth, a tiger beetle small enough to vanish into a single footprint in the sand. For decades, film crews have used this exact stretch of dunes whenever a script called for something that looked like nowhere else on the planet. At sunset, the whole field shifts color, sand that looked pale pink at midday turning close to red for a few minutes before the light goes. By morning, the wind has already erased whatever tracks were left there the day before. The world is full of amazing places waiting to be discovered. Subscribe and let's explore them together. The water here looks like it belongs somewhere tropical, not in a mountain range hundreds of miles from any coastline. Bear Lake sits right on the border between Utah and Idaho, split almost evenly between the two states. That turquoise color isn't a trick of the light or the camera. Tiny particles of limestone stay suspended in the water and scatter it back up as blue. Because the lake stayed cut off from other water systems for so long, a handful of fish species evolved here and only here. Several types of whitefish and one small sculpin still don't exist naturally anywhere else on Earth. Locals have their own theory about what else might be down there. Reports of something large moving beneath the surface go back to the 1800s, and the story has stuck around long enough to become part of how people talk about the lake today. Ducks work the shallows where the limestone particles settle thickest, and the blue gets almost unreal right where the light hits it straight on. Every summer, though, the towns along the shoreline turn their attention to something a little more certain. The valley turned out to be unusually good for growing raspberries, and the harvest became enough of an event that Garden City built a festival around it. If you enjoyed this journey, you can support the channel with a small coffee. Your support helps me keep creating more travel videos like this. Thank you so much. This canyon was never meant to hold water. A river ran through it until Glen Canyon Dam closed its gates in 1963, and it took another 17 years for the water rising behind it to finally reach the top. Entire side canyons went under during that time. So did places tied to several tribes with generations-old connections to this land. You can still read the flooding on the rock itself. A pale band runs along every cliff a few feet above the current waterline, left behind by minerals whenever the lake holds steady at one level long enough to stain the stone. That band has grown wider in recent years. Drought has pulled the water down well below what the reservoir was built to hold, and the drop has exposed ground nobody living had ever seen before, some of it already sprouting willow. The lake itself doesn't run in a straight line anywhere. It curls back on itself so many times that a single bay can look from above like a lake all its own. Once a boat gets into one of the narrower channels, the wind mostly disappears, boxed out by rock on both sides. For members of tribes with ties to this canyon, the shrinking water has meant something else entirely. land they'd only heard about in stories is showing up again. Get close to any one of those bays, though, and the rock keeps quietly telling you exactly how much water used to be there. Ice does more of the shaping here than water ever could. Each afternoon, snowmelt slips into cracks running through the rock. Overnight, the temperature drops, that water refreezes, and the ice expands just enough to pry the stone apart bit by bit. That cycle repeats more than 200 times most years at this elevation, which is part of why what looks like a canyon technically isn't one. Bryce Canyon is a series of amphitheaters cut into the edge of a plateau, and the walls get pushed back a little further every time a hard freeze hits them. Along the base of those walls, thousands of narrow rock spires called hoodoos stand packed together, each one left standing after the softer rock around it wore away first. The Paiute who lived in this region had their own explanation for how the hoodoos got there. One hoodoo near Sunset Point rises taller and more symmetrical than the rest, a wide block of rock balanced on a base that looks too narrow to hold it. People started calling it Thor's Hammer since it looks frozen mid-swing. Snow settles into the gaps between the spires most winters, leaving the whole amphitheater striped white against the rust-red rock. Ponderosa pines root straight into bare stone along the rim, leaning out over the drop at angles that look wrong until you notice how many of them are doing it. Some of the surrounding rock runs pale gray and some deep red, both laid down in the same ancient lake bed, but weathering at completely different speeds. The color is not something that happens to water on its own. Deep under this stretch of desert sits the remains of an ancient sea, salt left behind long after the water that carried it disappeared. To reach it, wells pump river water down more than half a mile, dissolving that ancient salt into a brine before pulling it back to the surface. Once the brine reaches these ponds, it gets a dose of blue dye, and the reason has nothing to do with how it looks. Darker water absorbs more heat from the sun, and more heat means faster evaporation. As the water disappears over the following months, the color changes right along with it. Bright blue fades to something paler, and by the time a pond is nearly dry, what's left behind turns a dull tan. That tan residue is the entire point. It gets scraped up and shipped out as potash, most of it bound for fertilizer. None of this was built for visitors. The ponds sit on private land, fenced off, with no path in and no swimming allowed, no matter how inviting the water looks. Most people only ever see this place from the air or from a viewpoint at Dead Horse Point looking down across the whole operation. The ponds rarely all match at once, some running electric blue, while others nearby have already faded toward green or brown, depending on how far along each one is. Up close, the edges of each pond crust over first, leaving a rim of pale salt crystals before the color underneath even starts to fade. Would you add Potash Ponds to your dream travel list? Comment 1 if it's already there, or 2 if you're adding it now. Around 2.7 billion years ago, the oldest rocks here, belonging to the Oeaukouts complex, began to take shape. Over hundreds of millions of years, sediments continuously accumulated and eroded, creating an astonishing diversity with 33 different rock formations, totaling over 21,000 meters in thickness. Between 70 and 40 million years ago, a monumental geological event known as the Laramide orogeny uplifted the Uinta mountain range, tilting and folding ancient rock layers to form a majestic wall for the future canyon. Subsequently, the primordial Green River was captured by another larger river system, ushering in an era of intense erosion. The water from this new river carved deep into the uplifted rock beds, creating sheer cliffs that blaze with colors like fire. And it was precisely the colors of those Triassic and Jurassic sandstone cliffs, illuminated by the afternoon sunlight, that captivated explorer John Wesley Powell, who named this place Flaming Gorge in 1869. Remarkably, this region continues to evolve, with an artificial reservoir formed after the dam was constructed in 1958. Construction finished in 1964, and it took the reservoir nearly 2 decades to fill all the way, since the Green River carries far less water than the Colorado systems that usually get this kind of attention. Fisher Towers were formed from sedimentary deposits laid down approximately 290 million years ago, belonging to the Cutler Formation. During that period, the area that is now Utah was a vast floodplain, where rivers and streams carried sand and mud from the rising Uncompahgre Mountains. Above them, a harder sandstone layer of the Moenkopi Formation formed about 245 million years ago, serving as a protective cap for the future towers. Around 80 million years ago, tectonic activity uplifted the entire Colorado Plateau, exposing these rock layers to the forces of erosion. Erosion began attacking cracks and weak points in the rock structure, particularly the softer layers. Groundwater seeped deep into the salt deposits below, belonging to the Paradox Basin, dissolving them and removing the underlying support for the rocks above. As the foundation collapsed, the rock masses above fractured and separated into individual pillars. The softer rock layers eroded more quickly, creating the tower shape with narrower bases than tops. The Moenkopi sandstone cap remained intact due to its greater hardness, protecting the lower sections from rapid wear. The colors of the towers range from deep purple to reddish brown, depending on the iron oxide content in each specific rock layer. And these towers are the result of nearly 300 million years of tectonic uplift, erosion, and geological subsidence, a process that continues to this very day. On the Colorado Plateau, there is a wound so narrow and deep that even sunlight must strain to reach its floor. They call it Buckskin Gulch, the longest slot canyon in the world, yet that name reveals nothing of how it came to be. This place was not formed by earthquakes tearing the ground apart, nor was it the result of any sudden geological event. Instead, this entire wonder was sculpted by the substance that seems the softest of all, water. Great storms unleash torrential rain upon the vast plateau, funneling it all into a narrow watershed where it charges forward with devastating speed. That raging current, armed with sand, gravel, and boulders, transforms itself into a colossal blunt blade, grinding day and night against the cracks in the Navajo sandstone. It is this very process of hydraulic abrasion that is the master sculptor, not the clear, gentle stream you might witness on a dry day. Look up at the sandstone walls soaring 150 meters high, and you will see irrefutable proof of that violent past. The rock surfaces are almost entirely devoid of sharp angles. Everything has been polished smooth by millennia of furious water, creating curves that are impossibly sensual and fluid. Venturing deeper, you will encounter the canyon's signature. Colossal boulders wedged high above, suspended directly over your head. The towering stone monuments of Monument Valley were once home to dinosaurs of the Triassic period. The Navajo call this place the Valley of the Rocks, while the world knows it as Monument Valley. The buttes, the red sand, the straight road vanishing toward the horizon. This landscape appears in more than 24 major films, and most people who arrive here see it first through a camera lens they've never actually held. Monument Valley sits on the Arizona-Utah border, entirely within the Navajo Nation, the largest Native American reservation in the United States. Over tens of millions of years, sand, silt, and minerals settled into layers thousands of meters thick under their own crushing weight. The buttes rise up to 1,000 feet above the valley floor, what's left of a plateau that once covered the whole region. Wind and water spent 50 million years carving into it. What remains are the parts that were hard enough to survive. Film historians point out, with some irony, that American settlers never actually passed through Monument Valley. It was Navajo land. Today, the park is managed by the Navajo Nation. About 100 Navajo families still live inside its boundaries. We gather info from many sources. If something seems off or you've got more to add, drop a comment. A single rock wall in northwestern Colorado holds over 1,500 dinosaur bones still lying exactly where they came to rest 149 million years ago. This is the heart of Dinosaur National Monument, home to one of the most spectacular exposed dinosaur graveyards on the planet. Late Jurassic, when this land was a fertile plain with lazy rivers meandering through lush tropical vegetation. Relentless droughts drove dozens of dinosaurs into a desperate gathering around the last shrinking waterhole. One after another, they collapsed and died, their bodies piling up in an open-air mass grave with no one to bury them. When the rains finally returned, violent flash floods thundered across the plain, sweeping up the carcasses, smashing their bones apart, and entombing everything in a thick sea of mud and sand. Not until around 65 million years ago did colossal tectonic forces begin lifting the entire mass upward from the depths. Wind, rain, and ice then worked relentlessly to erode the softer rock layers above, until one day, bones gleaming with a silvery sheen emerged into sunlight for the first time in 109 million years. In 1909, paleontologist Earl Douglas stumbled upon 8 tail vertebrae of an Apatosaurus jutting from the cliff face, and the rest became history. 3 sections of the same park, and no road connects any of them directly. Two rivers carved the whole place apart in the first place, the Green and the Colorado, meeting near the center of the park before continuing on together. John Wesley Powell was the first to map that meeting point in 1869 on the same expedition that went on to run the Colorado through the Grand Canyon. Cowboys grazed cattle through this canyon country long before it became a park, and ancestral Puebloan people were here centuries before them. Stone granaries they built into the canyon alcoves are still standing, tucked out of reach of rain and animals. Some of the trails rangers maintain today follow routes cattlemen cut generations ago, searching for water and grass in country that offers very little of either. Much of the park's backcountry only became reachable at all because of a uranium boom in the 1950s, when prospectors bulldozed rough roads, chasing deposits across the plateau. Those same roads are what four-wheel drive trips still use to reach the more remote corners of the park today. No dam sits upstream of the park on the Colorado, so the river through here still rises and falls with nothing but snowmelt deciding how high it gets each year. In a heavy snow year, that stretch of river turns into some of the roughest whitewater in North America. A gigantic white mirror stretching over 100 square kilometers across the Utah desert, one of the flattest natural surfaces on the planet and a place where countless land speed records have been set. But before it became a legendary racetrack, this place was the floor of an enormous lake, comparable in size to present-day Lake Michigan. Around 32,000 years ago, during the last ice age, a much colder and wetter climate filled the Great Basin with rainwater and glacial melt, forming the vast Lake Bonneville. The lake was so deep that it submerged the entire site of modern-day Salt Lake City beneath nearly 300 meters of water, stretching all the way from Idaho to Nevada. But Lake Bonneville had no outlet to the sea. The only way water could leave was by evaporating under the fierce desert sun. Over thousands of years, the gradually warming climate caused evaporation to far outpace incoming water, and the lake began to shrink slowly but irreversibly. Around 14,500 years ago, the rising water level breached a natural dam at Red Rock Pass in Idaho, triggering a catastrophic flood that released billions of cubic meters of water into the Snake River in just a matter of weeks. After that disaster, the lake continued to evaporate and contract, leaving behind several smaller lakes scattered across the basin, including present-day Great Salt Lake. For a few years, this place had a different name entirely because Kodak's lawyers had a problem with it. Utah tried to make that nickname official when the park opened in 1962, and Kodak pushed back, worried about protecting its trademark. For a while, the maps here read Chimney Rock instead, until Kodak eventually granted permission to use its name for free. The spires that earned the name in the first place aren't ordinary rock formations. Each one used to be the inside of something else, sediment that filled ancient cracks or springs underground and hardened into rock tougher than what surrounded it. Over millions of years, the softer sandstone around those hardened cores wore away completely, leaving the pipes standing alone across the basin. Some of them rise well over 100 feet, taller than most of the buildings in the small towns nearby. Cattlemen from those same towns used to bring their herds into the basin every winter, long before anyone thought to protect it as a park. Native Americans passed through even earlier, and handprints are still pressed into some of the sandstone walls. Very little light reaches this basin after dark, and the park has been recognized for skies clear enough to see the Milky Way without any real effort. One of the park's natural arches stood here for who knows how long before it finally gave out and collapsed in 2019. The spire beside it is still standing, the same shape it's been since long before anyone thought to name any of this. American Fork River flowing down from the mountains, a waterway that once served as the primary water source for the earliest settlers. The area was first settled by Mormon pioneers in the early 1850s, who primarily engaged in cattle ranching and farming along the creeks. The settlement was initially named Lake City, but was later changed to American Fork in 1860 to avoid confusion with Salt Lake City. In its early years, the settlers constructed a fort for defense during periods of tension with local Native American tribes. American Fork stands out as the first community in the region to establish a free public education system at a very early stage. The arrival of the railroad in the 1870s connected the city to larger commercial centers and stimulated the growth of the local economy. During the mining boom in American Fork Canyon, the area became an important transfer point for ore and supplies. During World War II, the expansion of the steel industry attracted a large workforce to the area, leaving a cultural legacy through the annual Steel Days festival. The city is religiously diverse, with multiple faith communities existing alongside the majority Mormon population. Several well-known films have chosen American Fork as a filming location, drawn by its distinctive mountain scenery. Mentioning the land of Utah, few can overlook one of the most remarkable natural wonders of the Western Hemisphere. That is the Great Salt Lake, one of the largest saltwater lakes in the world, and a remnant of the prehistoric Lake Bonneville, which once covered much of western Utah. Over thousands of years, as the climate warmed after the Ice Age, Lake Bonneville receded and left behind the saltwater lake in its present shape. Throughout history, this area was home to various Native American tribes who utilized the marshes and freshwater springs around the lake for hunting and fishing. In 1847, Mormon pioneers led by Brigham Young arrived in the Salt Lake Valley and chose this as their settlement site. For centuries, the lake served as a source of salt for local residents and a site for mineral extraction, including table salt and potash production, starting in the late 19th century. With salinity levels many times higher than the ocean, the lake supports distinctive organisms such as brine shrimp. The wetlands surrounding the lake are a critical stopover for millions of migratory birds, attracting nature enthusiasts for bird watching. Visitors can experience the sensation of floating effortlessly on the water due to the high salinity at Bridger Bay Beach on Antelope Island. The lake also holds cultural significance through structures like the Saltaire Resort, which was a famous entertainment destination beginning in 1893. When viewed from a distance, the skyline of Mount Timpanogos forms the shape of a reclining woman, a feature easily noticeable from many locations in Utah Valley. The mountain's name originates from the Timpanogos tribe, a group of Ute natives who lived in the area before European arrival. This is the second highest peak in the Wasatch Range and can be seen from most surrounding areas. On its slopes, there are two main trails, Aspen Grove and Timpanogos, both leading to the summit. Along the trails lies Emerald Lake, a high-altitude lake formed by glacial activity. This area was once a site for logging and mineral extraction in the late 19th century, leaving behind some historical remnants. In 1984, a portion of the mountain was designated as the Timpanogos Wilderness by the U.S. Congress to protect its ecosystem and natural landscape. To the north of the mountain lies the Timpanogos Cave National Monument, where the caves were discovered in 1887 and later preserved. These caves contain stalactites and stalagmites, though they are not the primary attraction of the area. The large mammal commonly seen here is the Rocky Mountain goat, which was introduced to the area in the early 20th century. Temperatures at the summit are significantly lower than in the valley, even during summer, due to the high elevation. Many people, when first seeing Factory Butte, often compare it to a massive industrial factory building rising from the desert, though in reality, it is a natural rock formation. This structure is located about 12 miles northwest of the town of Hanksville along Highway 24 in Wayne County, Utah. It stands at an elevation of 6,302 feet and is managed by the United States Bureau of Land Management. The area is situated approximately 14 miles east of the eastern boundary of Capitol Reef National Park. The name Factory Butte originated from early settlers who noticed that its outline resembled a manufacturing plant. The formation is composed of Mancos shale, a sedimentary rock dating back to the Cretaceous period. The surrounding terrain is described as badlands, characterized by rugged topography, erosion gullies, and steep cliff faces. Factory Butte and its vicinity are a popular destination for off-highway vehicles, attracting enthusiasts who come to challenge themselves on the bentonite clay hills. During spring, the arid desert unexpectedly comes alive with blooming wildflowers and cacti, creating a striking contrast. The area is home to several rare plant species protected under the Endangered Species Act. Goblin Valley State Park is located in a remote desert region in southeastern Emery County, Utah, USA. The geographic focus of this valley is thousands of bizarrely shaped rock formations resembling small goblins or giant mushrooms, commonly known as hoodoos. The geological formation here began about 170 million years ago, when the area was an ancient mudflat adjacent to a vast ocean. Over time, the Entrada sandstone layers weathered unevenly due to the continuous impact of rainwater and harsh desert winds. The harder rock layers on top act as a protective cap, preventing the softer rock body beneath from eroding as quickly as the surrounding material. The result of this millions of years-long natural erosion process is a unique maze of sedimentary stone. The terrain here is divided into three main valleys, with the density of rock pillars increasing progressively throughout each area. The park also features a fully equipped campground with dedicated parking spaces for recreational vehicles and personal tents. Due to its geographical characteristic of being far from major urban centers, the night sky here is completely free of light pollution, making it an ideal location for observing the Milky Way. The structure consists of a flat rock disk measuring approximately 18 meters wide, balanced atop a narrower stone pillar below. This geological formation is the result of asymmetric erosion and weathering processes occurring over millions of years through the actions of wind and rainwater. The upper sandstone layer consists of harder rock, which has a slower erosion rate compared to the softer sedimentary rock layers making up the base pedestal. The prolonged natural carving process gradually narrowed the supporting base, leaving a shape that resembles a traditional Mexican sombrero hat. The area surrounding the rock retains ancient habitation traces of the indigenous Navajo and Paiute tribes. By the early 20th century, this landmark became an important geographical marker for survey parties and miners during the oil boom in the San Juan Valley. Currently, the location of the rock sits directly adjacent to the U.S. Route 163 highway, allowing commuters passing through this route to easily observe it from a distance. There is a dirt turnoff leading from the main road into the flat area at the base of the rock for close-up viewing purposes. For athletic activities, the upper hat brim is recognized within the region as one of the technical rock climbing routes for practitioners. Did you know why an artificial reservoir in the middle of a barren desert in southwestern Utah can attract thousands of visitors every spring? Gunlock State Park, located about 24 kilometers from the city of St. George, is the answer, featuring a unique combination of water engineering and natural landscapes. The geography of the area centers around a reservoir formed by damming the Santa Clara River, surrounded by characteristic orange-red sandstone cliffs. The geological formation here is the result of ancient volcanic eruptions interspersed with the deposition of Navajo sandstone sediments from millions of years ago. The most distinct topographical highlight is the cascading waterfall system Gunlock Falls, which only appears in years when snowmelt from the northern mountains overflows the reservoir. As water breaches the dam's spillway, the flow cuts through fractures in the ancient rock layers, creating stepped waterfalls that plunge into natural potholes below. Cultural history notes that this land along the Santa Clara River was long a site of habitation and agricultural cultivation for the indigenous Southern Paiute people. To serve agricultural water regulation and flood prevention for the lower valley, the Gunlock Dam was constructed in 1970, directly creating the current reservoir. In 1971, the state of Utah officially established the state park to manage the water resources and public space around the lake. The rock formations across Utah never really stop moving. Arches collapse without warning, some after only a few decades, while new ones are already taking shape somewhere out of sight. One hard afternoon rain can cut a slot canyon that didn't exist the week before. Even the salt flats crack into a different pattern every time they dry out again. Whoever flies over this same stretch of desert next year will be looking at rock that has already moved on without them.